Wilson, will you call the roll?
Thank you. Commissioner Badami?
Here.
Commissioner Birch?
Here.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
Here.
Commissioner Janoff?
Here.
Commissioner Hanson?
Here.
Chair Kane.
Here. I would ask everyone to stand and join Commissioner Badami in the Pledge of Allegiance. Yeah, you keep your eyes on it. Thank you. The town of Los Gatos strongly encourages active participation in the public process, which is a cornerstone of democracy and essential to Planning Commission conducting its business on behalf of Town Council and citizens of the town. There are several ways for members of the public to participate in the deliberations of the Planning Commission. Prior to a commission meeting, written comments concerning agenda items may be submitted to staff. These are always welcome and they are always helpful. At meetings of the commission, there are two opportunities for members of the public to participate. During the verbal communications period, an individual may speak on any topic not on the agenda, and any member of the public may speak during the public hearing of an item that is on the agenda. If you wish to address the commission tonight during the verbal communication period or during consideration of an agenda item, please complete a speaker card located on the back of the bench, turn the card into a staff member, and print your name clearly so that I don't mess it up. For anyone who intends to speak this evening, I would ask that you come to the podium, adjust the microphone so that you are speaking right into it, state your name and address for the record. In fairness, for all who want to speak at this meeting, it is requested you limit your comments to 3 minutes. In addition to their service on Planning Commission, members of the Commission serve on several town committees. Do we have any committee reports tonight? Commissioner Badami.
The Conceptual Development Advisory Committee met earlier this afternoon. That would be Chair Kane, Commissioner O'Donnell, and myself with a council member. And we reviewed plans for demolition of an existing single-family home and construction of a 3-unit, 2-story multifamily dwelling on property zoned RM 5-12, that property location being 16940 Roberts Road. The input that the applicant was looking for was whether or not we would be amenable to the units being attached or detached. So we provided input, and we may be seeing it at some point in time at the commission level.
Thank you. Who represented Town Council tonight?
That would be Councilmember Spector.
Thank you. Any other reports? No other reports? We now come to the verbal communications portion of our meeting. Members of the public are invited to address the commission on any item not on the agenda. Do I have any cards for independent? No. So we're going to move to the consent calendar. Items on consent may be acted upon by a single motion. Before the Planning Commission acts on the consent calendar, any member of the public or the commission may request that the item be removed. And tonight we have one item on consent: approval of the minutes of the March 28th, 2018 Planning Commission meeting. Do we have a request to pull the item, or is there a motion to approve? Commissioner Badami.
I move to approve the consent item, which would be number 1, the approval of the minutes from March 28th of 2018.
Do I have a second? Commissioner Birch.
Seconded.
Any discussion? I'll call the motion. All in favor? Aye. Passes unanimously. I'm going to move to the public hearings portion of our agenda and consider agenda item number 2, which is 16666 Topping Way, Architecture and Site Application S17011. Property owner is Arthur Lynn, applicant is Dennis Norton, requesting approval for the demolition of an existing single-family residence and construction of a new single-family residence on property zoned R18. This is APN 532-09018. May I see a show of hands from commissioners who have visited the site? Are there any disclosures from commissioners on this item? Mr. Mullen, I believe you'll be giving the staff report.
Thank you, Chair Kane. For your consideration tonight is a continued request to demolish an existing residence and construct a new residence at 16666 Topping Way. The item was presented at the December 13th meeting, at which time the commission provided the applicant with direction and continued the item to allow the applicant time to respond. The applicant revised the proposal, reducing the size of the residence, eliminating the second story, increasing below-grade square footage, eliminating the third garage bay, and turning the garage 90 degrees to reduce its visual impact to the street. The revised proposal is presented for your consideration tonight. The town's architectural consultant reviewed the revised plans and provided recommendations, to which the applicant responded as summarized on page 4 of your staff report. A desk item to the staff report has been prepared, which includes public input received after the publishing of the staff report. If the Planning Commission determines that the revised project meets the direction provided at the December 13th meeting and finds merit with the proposed project, staff recommends approval of the application with the recommended conditions of approval included as Exhibit 22. This concludes staff's presentation, and we're available to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mullen. Commissioners, any questions for staff? Commissioner Hanson.
I had one question. There was sort of a going back and forth between our consulting architect and the applicant, which I can ask part of the question. But I noticed the last communication was our consulting architect on April 3rd had come back and said there were certain things that weren't in compliance with the residential design guidelines from his point of view. And I don't believe the applicant responded. And what I read in the staff report is that you were going to put that in the conditions of approval, but it just had a generic statement about complying with the consulting architect's recommendations. So I wondered if it should be on a certain date or something. I mean, supposing that it does get approved.
The condition could be fulfilled, or we could check compliance with that condition during review of the building permit. The recommendations were fairly straightforward, and the Planning Commission could articulate further detail to each recommendation if they so choose.
Okay, fair enough. So basically what you're saying is that during the building permit process, there would be input from the architectural consultant saying yes, or you are clear on what the architectural consultant said, and that you could check and make sure that they had made those changes.
I think generally we would review it at staff first, and if we had concerns or felt uncomfortable approving something at the staff level, we would certainly check with the architectural consultant. If there's further direction provided by the commission, we may be able to make compliance easier rather than, and maybe avoid having to go back to the consultant.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions for staff? I have one. Sometimes Mr. Cannon, the town architect, is short and sweet. Other times he gets into some interesting comments. On page 5 of his letter of February 27, the homes in this neighborhood are generally rather simple in their design treatment. Recommendations below emphasize changes to improve this home's compatibility with those existing homes. Now, that's coming right out of the residential design guidelines. In your estimation, was that achieved subsequent to the February 27th letter, Mr. Mullen?
What staff did in this case was we received a revised plan responding to these recommendations from the February 27th letter, and left that determination up to the town's consulting architect. So what you see in the letter, in the email from Mr. Cannon dated April 3rd is it's his response to the further revised plan, which attempted to address the recommendations of the February 27th letter. And then there's also a response from the applicant as well. So in most cases where the architectural consultant is engaged, we more or less leave that up to him, his determination.
And I think just to add a little bit more, the applicant obviously provided responses to the previous comments, and so tried to justify why they did not incorporate some of those changes. When Cannon reviewed the revised plans, he still thought the outstanding issues, as noted in the April 3rd email, still needed to be addressed. However, if the Planning Commission ultimately decides that one or more of those from their determination doesn't need to be addressed, that's always an option, and the applicant, I'm sure, will speak to this more.
All right. Other questions for staff? Seeing none, I'll open the public portion of the public hearing and give the applicant an opportunity to address the commission for up to 10 minutes. Who will be representing the applicant? Do I have a card for you, sir? I'll need one when you're done, okay? Not now.
I'm the owner. My name is Arthur Lin, and architect is sick today, so he cannot come.
All right.
Sorry. My name is Arthur Lin. I'm the property owner, and architect has stomach flu, so he cannot come today.
Right.
I'll try to answer all the questions you have. In case I cannot answer, and the question was addressed to the architect, and I will reply in the written form.
All right, you'll have 10 minutes to tell us about your application. The public will then have 3 minutes for each speaker, and you'll be invited back for a final 5 minutes.
Sure, got you. I think this design, the architect is being gone back and forth with the town architect, and right now looks like there are 3 outstanding issues on the Exhibit 25. The 3 outstanding issues are the excessive roof form complexities and design entry sensitivity to the surrounding neighborhood, and the other one is the window treatment. The architect, for the second item, the architect did lower the entry from 13 feet tall to 11 feet tall. So the entry has been lower like almost 20%. So the second item, the town architect is concerned. I think my architect has already addressed that. And for the first item, for the complexity of the roof form, I will be referring to the page. I don't know how do you call this page. February 27, page 5, and the page before that, February 27, page 4. And the town architect was talking about those 2 pop-out windows, pop-out forms. The town architect feel like that pop-out. The pop-out is the one in front of the garage, on the side of the garage, and also pretty much on the left-hand side and right-hand side of the entry, those 2 pop-out. The project architect designed this way to kind of symmetry, to make the house more balanced, but the town architect feels like it's too complicated. If you compare these two pictures, I kind of feel like this is personal preference, is a design style. It's not really any design guideline, this or that. It's just a design style. The project architect feels like it really adds those 2 pop-outs and really hide the garage, make the garage kind of fade away. And he feels like he need to put another pop-out on the right-hand side to balance it. That's why he feels strongly about this one. Hope I answered. The last item, the town architect talked about the window treatments, to add the window trims around all the windows. And this one, the town architect feels that you need more detail to the windows. But the project architect feels like he wants a more simplified design on the window treatments. So this is really a different philosophy in terms of design the house. And so really the outstanding issues are those 3. Hopefully I addressed all those 3 issues already. And no further comment.
All right, questions for Mr. Lin? Commissioner O'Donnell.
It's kind of unfair that your architect's not here, but I have to ask you some questions.
Sure, no problem.
These 3 open points, when the town architect opines on something, we take that fairly seriously. And if the other architect merely says, well, I don't agree with you, that's not usually enough, because they should explain. Architects can certainly have a disagreement on style and our application. But I have not heard that reason why our architect, his comments, which are contained in the email, Exhibit 25, are fairly clear, and you have just basically said, well, we don't agree with it. The problem is, you can't build this if we don't okay it. And at the moment, I've got the town architect telling us why that should be done, and I've got you saying, basically, my architect doesn't like that. Well, that's not a real persuasive argument.
Let me answer that. There are 3 items. I already answered the second item. The architect, the project architect, Dennis, already lowered the entry 2 feet, as I said. So the second item, he already addressed that. It's already lower 2 feet. It's from 13 feet to 11 feet. So it's almost like 18%, 17 or 18%. So the second item, he did address that. In terms of the first item and the third item about the complexity of the roof form, and I talked to the interior designer. We have an interior designer on the team, and also architect as well. And they both feels like there's a flavor to the buildings. But the town architect feels like the design should be as simple as possible. So I really couldn't. So you really need to look at those 2 pictures. One is really just a wall. Another one you pop out. There's some flavor to it. So it's really a different design style. So it's not really in terms of design guideline. This really fit the design guideline. It's just design style.
Thank you. Commissioner Birch.
Actually, Mr. Lin, I read this letter a little differently, and does the chair mind if I address a couple items on here in my questioning?
Not at all.
All right. So, for example, in discussing the 2 pop-outs, I actually agree with you. We do not normally like a flat surface. The way I read his comment to be the 2 pop-outs as shown on your floor plan are not similarly sized. Therefore, they're creating, because you have a larger pop-out on the garage and it faces closer to the street, it creates a heaviness on one side to the house to the other. So I would ask you, understanding that that's a detail you may want to keep, would you consider narrowing the window size on the garage so that the pop-outs are equal in size and balanced, so that you could maintain that feature?
That's a very, very good suggestion. I would definitely forward to that to the architect. I'm sure he'll agree with that.
Okay. And may I ask another question?
Yes.
And this one, do you have your drawings in front of you?
Yeah, I can't remember the drawing already.
You've got it memorized? Okay.
Yeah.
So one of the things that came up, and he actually had 3 bullet points under it, is the windows. Mm-hmm. You have multiple styles of windows on this house. And the way I was reading Mr. Cannon's letter is that he's actually just looking for them to be more cohesive together. So I'm certainly not going to sit and redesign windows, but I'm going to give an example on the east-facing drawing. I'm on sheet 6. Mm-hmm. If you look to the left, you have 2 double-hung windows, but it also appears to have windows at the ground level. Am I reading that drawing correctly?
Yeah. I'm not sure that's a window or it's a door. It looks like a door on the left-hand side.
I think perhaps with his letter, there may be some ambiguity on some of these.
Let me take a look. It looks like a door. Looks like it's all the way down to the floor.
I'm on 6. I did not check the interior.
The
It's a window. If you look on the interior elevation, that is a window. Yeah, I see it now. I see it. So my question would be again, understanding that you have your personal preference for your home, but we also have design guidelines, would you and your architect be willing to take a look at having things such as ground level windows being taken out of the design, making sure all the window double hung with, I guess, the multi-pane on the top be consistent throughout?
Yes.
Rather than have the mix and match. And then the other thing, he was actually asking about trim around your windows. He would like those windows to be more accentuated against the house. Let's see. Wood trim is also encouraged on stucco houses, would you be willing to look at adding a wood trim around those windows to actually bring a little bit more depth to the appearance of the home?
Should I wait to answer, because it looks like Chairman has a question?
Well,
No, you get to answer me first, and then,
I appreciate the detail, and I think you're right on in what you're saying. I'm wondering if some of the detail could be held until after the public hearing,
probably.
or now, either
Oh.
way.
Do you want to hold those and talk after we hear public?
Oh, I'd take his response now.
Well, I can answer that, because we have a meeting about this one, to specific, related to this comment. And 3 people were sitting in the room and tried to decide, should we put a wood, kind of wood trims or wood casing outside the windows? And I didn't put any comment. The interior designer and architect, they both feel strongly, just put the window seals at the bottom. And they don't want to put the casing around it. But they say if this is a make or break point, they will put trims in. But for them, they prefer not to put trims on it. It's
Thank you.
really, really artistic. It's not about the cost.
Understood.
That's how they feel.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Badami.
The town values neighborhood input, so I don't know if you're aware of a letter that we received that's part of our Exhibit 28. And it's a neighbor that lives at 16685 Marchmont, right behind the property. And when the reconfigured story poles were erected, she was hoping to meet with the architect or speak with the architect about the new changes. And he said the plans are complete and he's not open to any change, period, end of conversation. Does that ring a bell with you? Are you aware of this?
I don't know the way he responds it, but I think it's a good idea he would incorporate into the design. But if you look at her comment, it's not really to compromise. It's really ask us to do what she wants. She's asking for 2 things, and she pretty much, it's not to take her consideration, it's to tell us to do what she wants us to do. Number 1 is plant more trees there for her to have privacy. Let me respond to that. Her property is sitting about 3 or 4 feet above this property. It is a slightly slope, grade. So her property is sitting really high to begin with. Number 2, this property on the left-hand side is the east side, on the right-hand side is the west side, and toward her property is the south side. If you plant big trees, this house on the backyard will have very little sunlight. For the sunlight considerations, from the sunrise from the east to the west, this house requires a lot of sunlight in the backyard. So in terms of privacy, her house, first of all, is on the top already. I don't understand why she wants us to plant big trees over there. And she can plant trees on her side.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Other questions? Commissioner Janoff.
This does go to the architectural comments, but I wanted to also talk about the roof forms. I think what's at issue for me has less to do with the pop-outs than it does this gable, because the roof of the garage is slightly lower than the roof of the house proper that's just behind that. So you're seeing this odd gable for some reason because the garage is 6 inches shorter or however much shorter than the room behind it. I think what you could do is simplify the roof pop-out, the issue, by leaving the garage, or having the garage be the same height as that part of the roof, so it doesn't step down in that unusual fashion. So that's number 1, and that speaks to the excessive roof form complexity. It would also simplify that roof form, creating that hip that runs out to would incorporate the garage. Second, with regard to the second point, the design entry, I don't think his issue, as I read it, has to do with the height of the entry. I think it has to do with the use of columns, which creates a much more formal aspect. So you might look at ways to soften that. It's a very stark-looking entrance. We aren't seeing any of the landscaping, so it may be that's where his concern lies. And then thirdly, with regard to the windows, I think what you have is a very simple exterior. There's not a lot going on except the multiple windows along the back side of it. But when you're looking at the elevation that faces the street, it's a very plain, and it's very plain with regard to the window treatment relative to the doorway. So it's kind of off in design because the windows are so simple, where you've got this elegant, formal, colonnaded entry. So I think adding the trim to the windows would help to give them a little bit of interest, also make them slightly larger in appearance, which would complement the larger entry. So those are my comments on the architecture.
What we're primarily looking for is questions for the speaker.
And so my question is, would you be willing to make those changes to the roof line to create a simplified roof line from that center section to the garage?
I did talk to the architect on this too. One is the roof line, the pop out, and also the window treatment. And he said that he prefers the way he designed, but if he feels like he would be forced to do that, he willing to do that. That's a make or break, and he would
So
do that.
you would be willing to take those
That's
steps?
correct.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions for the speaker? Commissioner Hanson.
Just one additional question. One of the things I noted in the consulting architect's report was that he was looking for this house to fit into the neighborhood. And I think he mentioned, in terms of the simplicity, using as a guideline some of the other houses. So he gives us pictures of all the houses in the surrounding neighborhood. And, and I wondered if the architect had looked at the other houses in making its judgment about whether that was the right style or not, because I think that was part of also where our consulting architect came from. Is if you look at most of the houses in the neighborhood, they don't have these big stone columns, they don't have these pop-outs. So I would ask, do you think that the architect could take a look at that and make sure, because that's an essential component of being in compliance with our neighborhood design guidelines, is to fit into the neighborhood. And it includes architectural style as well.
Should I respond to this? I'll tell you that there's a street run directly behind Topping, and the name of the street called Marshmont. And there's been a lot of property being developed in that street. On this street, there's less new property being developed. A lot of properties were established maybe in the 1950s or 60s, and maybe some being remodeled. So at that time, the house was much more moderate style. But if you go to the Marshmont, just the next street, and the design is more extravagant or more fancy. And I think that maybe that's just the way things are moving now. When you are building a house in 2018, you don't build a house that is the style like 1950 or 60s. And the house right now is a lot bigger now. People don't build house in Los Gatos. It's a big lot for only 2,000 square feet. It's just the trend is different. You go to Marshmont, just one street over. And this street, unfortunately, just not many new developments going on right now.
Thank you, Mr. Lin.
Sure.
I'll open the hearing to comments from the public. When the public is finished, Mr. Lin, you'll have 5 more minutes to conclude your remarks.
Thank you very much.
I have 2 cards. If anyone else wishes to speak, please give me a card. Mr. Lin, remember to give me a card now. It's on the back of your bench. Ms. Catherine Derby? No, you can't. Fix the mic, state your name and address for the record. When the yellow light comes on, you'll still have 30 seconds. When the red light comes on, you're done.
So when the yellow light goes on, I can wait 30 seconds before I speak?
Yes, I just want to make sure he hasn't started at the time yet.
I don't want to do that. Okay. All right. My name is Catherine Derby. I live right next door to the proposed property. I wasn't here at the last meeting. I kind of wish I had, because I did like the design of the 2-story. And it is true that all around our neighborhood, Marchmont and on our street, everybody's going to 2 stories. And I think part of that is it increases the property value if somebody can come and buy your house and know that maybe in the future, in 20 years, they can get another story and get a bigger house that may be worth more. So I was kind of disappointed that we didn't go for the 2-story. And I thought it was a beautiful design. So,
Thank you very much.
Yeah. The other thing that I kind of wanted to say about this, I don't even remember what the other thing I was going to say about it. But I don't understand why in this neighborhood, the larger houses are not acceptable, because our neighborhood, we're all quarter-acre lots, and this particular lot is about a third acre, is that right? It's about a third of an acre. So the larger house, including the two-story, which is no longer, I guess, viable at this point, was appropriate, I thought, for the size of the lot. And I don't know if you've driven down Marchmont, just as is it Mr. Lin? Just Lynn has said, these are enormous houses on Marchmont, very big, very fancy. Columns, you got more than columns, okay? And they're going that way, and they're selling for $4 million and up, you know, so, my husband and I are thinking about retiring. We're thinking about possibly, you know, selling our house, and we feel, you know, if we were not able to tell the new prospective person that may want to buy the house that was very limited, and the house, it's got to be simple, it's got to be small. When all around us, they're larger, that kind of is a little disturbing. We were kind of wondering if that would decrease our value as far as selling the house, so we were a little concerned about that. Oh, the other thing is, we're hoping that this, I know you are working as hard as you can, and I do appreciate the fact that you are looking into the style of the neighborhood and make sure things fit in. But I live in the neighborhood, you know, and I've lived there for how long? 30 years? You know, and I've been very happy to see the larger houses come in, and I'm upgrading it. Oh, sorry, I'm done. Okay. I'm happy to see the new houses coming in. I'm happy to see that people are putting money into the place, because Topping Way was a mess, and now that people are coming in and buying the houses, it's looking better. It has not gone to it's been the last one in the area. If you go on La Chiquita, beautiful big houses. Marchmont, big houses, no problem. They seem to be, everybody seems pretty happy there. Topping is seems like the last one, and I'd hate to see it kind of saying, no, keep it simple, when this is not the way the neighborhood is going. It's not going, keep it simple.
Thank you very much.
That's
Now,
it.
let me see. Are there questions for the speaker? Commissioner Birch?
So when there was a proposed second story, you didn't have any privacy issues?
No,
with
are
the
you
house to
kidding?
that?
I don't know, it didn't bother me at all. And what's interesting about this privacy issue, because the person that it would be have the privacy issue in this particular case, and I apologize for whoever the person that lives behind the property, they are looking down on this house. It's not that this house is looking down. You got to remember, the Marchmont house is here, 2 stories, big, beautiful house. It's wonderful. And it's looking down on the Topping house. So the real privacy problem was not the Marchmont house. The issue was the Topping house. They have less, you know, they have more of a problem. If somebody's in the second story, they can look right down in there. So I was surprised that the privacy issue came up, when it's actually a privacy issue should have been the reverse. Let's take down the Marchmont house and make that a 1-story house. You know, so I was very surprised at that. And I did like the first design. I think the architect is a wonderful architect. I thought it was beautiful. I haven't spent that much time on this one because I figured this is probably a go.
Thank you.
So anyway, that's all.
What? Any more questions? Thank you very much.
Okay. That's it.
Daniel Moore? State your name and address.
Okay, my name is Daniel Moore. I'm at 16650 Topping, next door to the proposed project. I agree with everything my wife said, but the other thing I want to say is, personally, I'm really tired of the house not moving forward next door, because it's a blight on the neighborhood while we all talk about it, and it's getting frustrating. Just wanted to let you know about that. It'd be nice to get the thing built and have the place look nice. Thank you.
Any questions for the speaker? Thank you. Mr. Lin, I will recall you for 5 minutes to add anything you heard or rebut anything you heard.
Such a property, 16666 Topping Way, is the biggest lot in the whole neighborhood, including Marchmont. This is the biggest lot in the whole neighborhood. But for some reasons, the person behind this building has all kinds of issues. And they were the person who bought the property only 12 months ago. And their house is a way smaller lot, biggest 4,100 or something. Every time they say, we want to come here to talk to you, they want to dictate us, not to talk to us. They want to dictate us, what should we design the house? So that's why the architect toward the end saying that, well, she has some problems. She wants us to design a really, really small house. We changed from 2-story to 1-story. She's still not happy. And she wants us to plant trees in our property to protect her privacy. I said, what is something new? I never heard that. So toward the end, I just feel like, oh, maybe she writes me a check, I'll design the house she wants.
Thank you. Questions for the speaker? I wanted to go back and emphasize something that was said earlier, and that has to do with the town architect's comment on neighborhood compatibility. And of the 3 bullets that you were discussing earlier, it's bullet number 2. So that's an opportunity to ask you, do you understand what seems to be the gravity of that one? He's taking that right out of the residential design guidelines. It's not Mr. Cannon's opinion. He's saying this applies to the residential design guidelines, which is more or less the Bible we have on approving or denying projects. Is that understood?
Totally understand. And we take out the stone column, the stone wainscot at the bottom. We took it out. We lowered the entry by 2 feet, from 13 feet to 11 feet. And I believe those 2 columns are the structure to support. Then maybe you can come up with different kind of column, but those 2 columns are required for structural support.
All right, thank you very much. I'm going to close the public portion of the public hearing and look to my commissioners for comment, additional questions of staff, or for someone to make a motion. Commissioner Birch.
So I have a question of staff. The applicant seems quite willing to compromise on these items. It is unfortunate your architect isn't here, but I know though he's saying he needs to go confer with his architect about these items. So does it, in the sake of not having this spin and him come back with his architect, can we just go through the items that were a concern of Mr. Cannon and address the items that the applicant has actually seemed willing to compromise on to move forward and not have to have it come back? The drawings just go to you and you make sure they are compatible with what we said?
Yes.
Or we did hear a lot of conversation about paying more attention to Mr. Cannon's bullets and other items. I'm wondering how the commission would feel about moving this on a continuance to a day certain and finalizing all of these items with his architect present. Commissioner O'Donnell.
I think Commissioner Birch, I agree. Actually, I don't think it's necessary that they come back. We do have, other than these 3 comments, which I think we can deal with, if there are other comments, because other things have been mentioned, maybe the continuance would be necessary. When this started, I thought it would be very helpful were the architect here. But after seeing where the disagreements lie, it looks like, at least as to the 3 points of Larry Cannon, we can make it clear what we think should be done, and that would take care of that. So if there's some other matter, which we've heard about, then maybe we would need to delay it. I would prefer not to continue it, not to delay it, not to cause him more expense, if we could do that.
So what I think I'm hearing is possibly a motion that specifies the conditions of approval. And
Yes,
and if we want to take a moment to work that out, I think that's more expeditious than continuing.
One other question, though. The other question would be, it's easy to look at these 3 points, easy to know what they are at least, and then decide what we want to do about them. But I want to make sure that my fellow commissioners don't have another point that is not so easily taken care of. If they don't, then I think what the chair is suggesting should work fine.
We have the 3 bullets. Do we want to say anything about landscaping with respect to the letter that we received? Commissioner Birch.
I seem to be talking a lot, I'm sorry.
Don't be.
In this instance, we are try to be very sensitive to privacy, but I do feel in this instance, because of the different elevations, what would have to be planted to create that site barrier would be very expensive. We're talking about very mature trees. So I feel like he has compromised greatly by going from 2-story to 1-story, and from that point on, I'm quite certain that the minimal amount of landscaping that may need to be done could probably be worked out between the neighbors without us putting a hardship. But that is my opinion.
All right, other comment? Commissioner Hanson.
I wanted to say I didn't have any other issues, and I wanted to go beyond that and say I feel like that the applicant really did a lot to address the concerns we raised that led to the continuance. And if you kind of look at where things stand right now, I know there was comments about it being a one-story and that maybe not being desirable, but if you look at the statistics in the staff report, actually the overall house, including the below-grade square footage, has more square footage than it did before because they've added 924 square feet to below-grade square footage and only reduced the top by 200 square feet. So it seems like it would be a very nice house. It's the second largest in the neighborhood, but not the largest anymore. So I think that they have, other than these points in the consulting architect's letter, have addressed most of our concerns. And I think I agree with Commissioner Birch that in the particular case of the residents on Marchmont, I think it might be unreasonable to expect them to put screening in for a house that's above them.
Thank you. And for the record, there was some discussion of houses on other streets being larger, bigger, et cetera. And this came up at, what was it, our January 18th meeting when we did this? And I talked to staff and I took a drive around the block. A number of those are county pockets, which are not subject to our standards. So that I offer that as one reason for a seeming inconsistency. Commissioner Birch, did you want to help us out?
Well, I was going to see, I'm happy to make a motion unless there's other conversation. So I'll venture this, and please, anyone step in if I miss anything. So I am going to move to approve architecture and site application S-17-011-16666 Topping Way, requesting approval for demolition of an existing single-family residence and construction of a new single-family residence on property zoned R18. Before I make these findings, can I go through the points, or, okay. I'm first going to make the comment that I thank the applicant for the modifications that have been made to address the concerns that had previously come up. It leaves what I consider to be some somewhat small details. So I'm going to include in my motion that on item 3.5.2 of Mr. Cannon's letter dated April 3rd, 2018, in reference to the multiple roofs, that the suggestion made by Commissioner Janoff be addressed, being that the highest point of the roof of the garage match the home structure behind it, so it is one single roof line. On 3.6.3, I'm going to reference Mr. Cannon's letter dated February 27th. On the last page, he actually provided options of columns that would be appropriate. I'm going to ask that the applicant just ensure that the columns on the porch be one of those that have been deemed appropriate for the neighborhood by our consulting architect. On the last item, 3.7.4, I am going to ask that trim be put around the windows to enhance them on the front of the house, as it is a relatively simple design. I do not think we actually said anything about the projecting window sills, but obviously they are encouraged to create some depth. And then I don't believe this is on it, but it does sort of deal with the roofs in the front line. The two pop-outs that were referenced by Mr. Cannon in his February 27th letter, I'm just going to ask the applicant that they match in size to eliminate the feel of one side being heavier than the other. I believe that addresses those items, and then I can find that the project is categorically exempt according to CEQA. I can make the required findings as required by section 9.10.09030E of Town Code for demolition of existing structure. I can make the findings required by town residential guidelines that the project complies with the residential guidelines once these items are incorporated into the design. And I can make the required considerations as required by section 29.20.150 of the Town Code for granting approval of an architectural and site application, and approve the applications with the conditions contained in Exhibit 22 and the revised development plans as attached in Exhibit 27, along with the conditions that I outlined in my motion. Did I get it?
Do we have a second? Commissioner O'Donnell,
Yes.
your mic might be off. I didn't hear you.
I second the motion.
Thank you. I would say to the maker and the seconder that your three bullets be subject to, assuming the Director of Community Development knows what we want, that they be subject to his approval.
Yes, absolutely.
To the seconder?
Yes.
Any other discussion? Commissioner Janoff?
I just have a question with regard to the last point, creating the pop-outs of equal width, I'm assuming. The current width of the two-car garage is 26.6, and the other side is 28. So the recessed side is actually smaller, and you want that one to be smaller.
I believe the garage side was larger,
It's 26,
and that one was 28.
yeah,
Then I would want it to be smaller to match.
just to clarify.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? Then I will call the question. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Passes unanimously. Mr. Paulson, are there appeal rights regarding this item?
There are, thank you. Anyone who's not satisfied with the decision of the Planning Commission can appeal the decision to the Town Council. Forms are available in the clerk's office. There's a fee for filing the appeal, and the appeal must be filed within 10 days.
Thank you. Darn old paper. I had it right in front of me. Well, I meant to do this earlier, and I had a piece of paper that articulately would detail what I'm talking about, but it's gone away. There are still openings for applications for town committees and councils, and the deadline for filing that interest has been extended to, do we know, Mr. Paulson?
I don't have that off the top of my head, but I want to say the 25th is coming to mind.
I found it. Deadline extended, board, commission, and committee volunteer opportunities. For those of us here and for the millions watching at home, the deadline application has been extended to Wednesday, April 25th. You nailed it. Thank you. So we move to the public hearings portion of our agenda and consider item 3, which is 221 Almendra Avenue. Zone change application Z 17-001. Property owner is Joey McCarthy. Applicant is Bess Wiersema. I shouldn't do that, sorry. I usually mess that up. Requesting approval of a zone change from 0 LPH, Office with a Landmark and Historic Preservation Overlay, to R1D LHP, Single Family Residential, Downtown with a Landmark and Historic Preservation Overlay. This is APN 510-14-044. Our staff report tonight will be provided by Mr. Safdie.
Thank you. Good evening, Commissioners. Before you tonight is a request for a zone change from office with a landmark and historic preservation overlay to single-family residential downtown with a landmark and historic preservation overlay located at 221 Almendra Avenue. The property was originally developed with a residential use in the 1900s, but was converted to an office use. The proposed zone change will be consistent with the pattern of land use and zoning in the surrounding residential neighborhood. For these reasons and the analysis provided in the staff report, staff recommends that the Planning Commission make the required findings in Exhibit 4 of your staff report and forward a recommendation of approval to the Town Council. This concludes staff's presentation, and we are happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Safdie. May I see a show of hands from commissioners who have visited the property under consideration? Are there any disclosures? Are there questions for staff? Commissioner Hanson.
I just had one question. It was kind of a history question. As we always like to see the zoning line up with the general plan, and clearly this is an application that's going in that direction. But I did note that all the general plan designations for that entire area off of Santa Cruz are all medium density residential in the general plan. But then there's quite a few of these properties that are actually general plan residential, but they're office. And I was just wondering how that came to be. Because it's considered a residential area from our general plan. Was that a trend that started many years ago? And is that something we should be considering versus just this one property?
Well, I'll jump in, and if Mr. Safdie has anything additional, all you should be considering is this application. There are a number of areas, and this happens to be one that has a lot of them, where you had probably uses that were office, but ultimately the town, when it made a general plan amendment probably decades ago, said ultimately we want this to be a residential area off of North Santa Cruz. And so that's why they have a general plan designation of residential. Up the street, there's two properties that converted to houses, and one option there is to do a conditional use permit. And so they actually were approved with conditional use permits, but they still have the office zoning. As of late, we've been encouraging, based on recent decisions where we have these conflicts between zoning and general plan designations, that the applicants actually make those conform with each other.
Okay, thank you.
I meant to say to my fellow commissioners, regarding this zone change application, our job is to recommend approval or denial to town council, or to continue the matter to a date certain with specific direction to staff. Are there other questions for staff? Seeing none, I will turn to the applicant. Ms. Wiersma, will you be representing the applicant tonight? Give us your name and address. You will have 10 minutes.
I promise to take less than 10. I think this one's pretty straightforward. Bess Worsema representing Studio 3 and the property owner, Joey McCarthy. Okay, I think that Ryan probably provided you guys with all the information about the property, pretty straightforward. We just always, as you know, provide you with some project data so you understand what can happen on this property when it is converted. We are intending to return it to its residential use from its current designation. Oops, let me back up. So if you look at the FAR tables and charts, I think we're talking about potentially as a future for this project and a single-family residence, returning it or keeping it, obviously, in keeping with FAR. If you go around the neighborhood, a house of about 2,500 square feet on this property, I think, is reasonable. So I think that returning this also is consistent with newer homes and existing homes in the immediate and expanded neighborhoods. Interestingly, we sit right on the line. And you can see we share a side property line with the Bank of America, and then these continuous parking lots that kind of wrap around and aren't so fantastic back behind. So we're right in first house in the residential zone. Definitely feels residential, I think, when you walk by it, with the exception of the drive-through prescription window or whatever was there in 1940s. These two adjacent properties were converted. I think that's what Joel was talking about with the use permit some time ago, and new custom single-family homes were built on those. This is just a little bit of the history going all the way back. Original use residential built in 1900, modified use commercial in 1941. It is consistent. It seems to be in the 40s and 50s with all the houses that we deal with in my office when houses got converted to commercial use. So it's kind of interesting during that time. Obviously, something was going on downtown that allowed that. Our requests are to rezone from commercial to residential. Per the guidelines and rules, any future Arkansas application will show the required 2 on-site parking spots for the residential use. Based on the findings, the property has served 2 functions, first as a home and then as commercial space, and we're just asking to return it. This property does have some parking spaces allocated in the PAD, and no variance is requested. We're just holding those as part of the project. If you do have questions about that, and I don't think that they came up much in the staff report, and they may be somewhat irrelevant now, I don't know, Ryan, but we can talk about that should you have questions. Just to remind you of the look and feel, we have the bank to the left, and then these are the two newer houses are the upper right-hand corner and the lower left-hand corner, and then the quirky one at Almendra, which I love that front porch on that project. Surrounding neighborhood photos going around. You guys obviously know downtown. I think we all kind of do. This is our existing property. Obviously, I don't think that came in 1900, but nice, simple form. Backside of the project. Existing footprint, you can tell it's very residential, even matches some of the adjacent buildings. We do have existing floor plans and elevations if you want to see that, if you weren't able to make it. But so that just concludes my very brief presentation tonight. I don't think we're discussing anything of unusual character for this particular one.
Thank you. Are there questions for the speaker? Seeing none, I'm going to thank you for your comments and invite members of the public who wish to speak on this item. If you haven't already turned in a card, do so now. And I have one card from Mr. Dean Turkle. Got it? I'm going to roll. All right.
Hi, my name is Dean Turkle. I'm from, I live at 22045 Hutchison Road, Los Gatos. So actually it's a long way from you guys here. But my wife actually does own a property where Thai Spices in downtown. So she's not here and asked me to come in and ask a question. Pretty much she wants to know whether if you do change this ordinance, will it affect any noise or traffic ordinances as well for the businesses in the area? That's my only question.
Well, we're not necessarily in response mode. Do you want to say anything, Mr. Paulson?
Staff will respond after we close the public hearing and you're in deliberations.
Okay. You understand that?
No.
We're going to get back. We don't do Q&A during the public,
Okay.
but when we're done with that, we'll do some A.
Okay.
All right. Questions for the speaker? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
I will recall the applicant, who will have up to 5 minutes to rebut anything that she's heard or add any additional information. Then I will open my mic and close the public portion of the public hearing and look to my commission for questions, comments, or someone make a motion. Commissioner Badavi.
I'll try a motion. This property was originally developed for residential use. Residential use is principally permitted within the R-1D zone. So therefore, I move to forward a recommendation of approval for zone change application Z-17-001, requesting approval of a zone change from O-LHP to R-1D LHP, and I can make the findings per Exhibit 4.
Do we have a second? Commissioner Birch.
I'll second.
Is there any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? It passes unanimously. Are there appeal rights on this matter, Mr. Paulson? And also, would you give us an answer to the question we received from the public?
Yes, thank you. There are not appeal rights, as this is a recommendation to the town council. In regards to this action, it does not affect parking, traffic, or anything else on any other parcel except for this parcel specifically.
We'll now move to the public hearings portion of our agenda item number 4, which is 248 Jared Lane, architecture and site application S-16-054. Property owner is San Pan, requesting approval for construction of a new singular-family residence and removal of large protected trees on vacant property zoned HR1 APN 532-34071. May I see a show of hands from the commissioners who were able to visit the site? Do we have any disclosures? Commissioner Janoff.
I did have a conversation with an immediate neighbor, but it was not substantive in nature. Get it?
I think I understand that. Mr. Mullen, would you be providing the staff report tonight?
Thank you, Chair Kane. Before you tonight is a request to construct a new single-family residence and remove large protected trees on vacant property in the hillside area located at 248 Jared Lane. The subject property is located on the north side of Jared Lane, approximately 120 feet east of its intersection with Vista Del Monte. In 2011, the Planning Commission approved a project similar that utilized a site plan similar to the current proposal. The project is being forwarded to the Planning Commission with requests for several exceptions to the hillside development standards and guidelines, mostly related to site access. These exceptions include development outside of the least restricted development area, driveway with slopes exceeding 15%, retaining walls with heights exceeding 5 feet and lengths exceeding 50 feet, grading exceeding maximum allowable cut and fill depths, and a detailed discussion of these concerns is included in your staff report. The project does propose removal of 57 protected trees, including 3 large protected trees, and again, details are provided in the staff report on pages 7 to 9. Additionally, the staff report provides a summary of the review by the town's architectural consultant for the proposal. Based on the analysis provided in the staff report, staff recommends approval of the architecture and site application, subject to the recommended conditions included in Exhibit 4. This concludes staff's presentation, and we are happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mullen. Questions for staff? Commissioner Badami.
This application was filed in 2016, and that was prior to us updating the seller policy. So is it subject to the prior seller policy at the time of application, or does the new definition of below grade square footage apply?
We would have to look at the dates, and I would have Mr. Mullen consider whether or not there would be a difference, even if we used one versus the other. If you had something in particular that you were concerned about with the difference, then we can definitely look to address that.
I would be concerned with, we did have a definition for a cellar, and I, for one, have difficulty understanding that you drive your car into a cellar and call it a garage, but we don't have a definition for a cellar anymore under the new policy.
Well, we don't have a seller policy, but actually, if you remember when that was forwarded, it actually didn't change that interpretation when we went to the below grade square footage. There was question about that, but ultimately when it got approved from council, it used the same interpretation where if you are buried and not exceeding a certain height, even if the face is exposed, that area is not counted as square footage.
I'm also concerned about the 2 levels of cellar. So now we have on this application, we have a sub-cellar and a cellar that's stacked. So I don't think that that was permissible under the original cellar policy. I think it changed the way we counted the square footage.
My recollection of the cellar policy, which is now in the ordinance, was that there was no prohibition against multi-level cellars.
Well, there wasn't a prohibition, but it changed the way we counted allowable square footage.
I think what you're referring to is we had some language in there about having cellar under multiple structures. Mm-hmm. So that was one issue. I think we would have to pull all of the old cellar policy information, pull all the new information to give you an adequate response on that.
Thank you.
Other questions for staff? Commissioner Hanson.
So I know we normally put in the terms and conditions about complying with any recommendations from the arborist. In this particular case, maybe I just was reading this thing wrong, but I read our consulting arborist report. There was there was Exhibit 10, and then there was also Exhibit 13. And I was maybe unduly alarmed, but a bit alarmed because there were statements made in there about possible trees that weren't counted, which seemed to go away by the second version, because in Exhibit 13. And then there was also discussion about the retaining walls, the pervious pavers, the retention ponds, irrigation plan trenching, all of which would have very severe impacts to the trees, which were not noted in the applicant's tree report. And they also flagged that there wasn't adequate protection. So what I was trying to get to is it seemed like a big leap of faith to just say comply with the consulting arborist report, given all that. So what am I not seeing? What should I think about what I just read?
That's a good question. Thank you. What you're not seeing is 6 or 7 previous designs for the site. And there were trees that weren't included in previous iterations of the site plan. There were trees that weren't showing adequate protection. And there were shifts made to detention ponds. So what you're seeing in front of you is the response to all these recommendations by the town's arborist. So in front of you is a complete package showing all the trees of concern. It's the shift of the detention ponds and updated tree protection information for the trees on site. What the position staff was in when we were writing this report was the applicant provided us an arborist report, which we require them peer review. And rather than updating arborist reports down the line and just providing complete revised arborist reports, we got addendums. And in this case, we had, normally if we get a complete arborist report after the town's arborist has reviewed it, we would provide just the last final copy showing that we were in compliance. In this case, we got addendums, so you're seeing 5 or 6 arborist reports and not having the benefit of seeing all the different plans that were reviewed in sequence.
All right, so what you're saying is basically that this arborist report that was dated on December 5th, 2017, since that time, the applicant has responded to a lot of those concerns and they are incorporated into the designs that we are looking at.
That's correct.
And then we have the additional protection of, were this to get approved, that they still have to comply with any arborist recommendations that might come after this.
That's correct, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions for staff? I have one. The staff report provides, as always, that notice cards were sent to tenants within 500 feet of the subject property. Now, I was up there. I didn't see anything within 500 feet of the subject property. Exactly how many cards did we send out? Do you know?
There were 54 cards sent out. I know that this is hard to see. That's a map of 500 feet. All the blue properties were noticed and the occupants and owners were noticed. We require 500 feet for hillside properties and at least 30 properties. So in this case, we hit 54 and had 54 cards and did our 500 feet.
I'm quite taken aback. I didn't see anything through the tree. I couldn't see it through the trees. But thank you for sending out those cards. Other questions for staff? In that case, I'm going to call the applicant forward to talk to us for 10 minutes, but I don't think I have an applicant card, do I? State your name and address, please.
Yes. Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Steve Yan, architect working on this project.
All right, Mr. Yan, you will have 10 minutes.
Sure.
And then the public will speak.
Yeah.
And then you'll have 5 minutes in conclusion.
Understood. I think I will use less than 10 minutes shortly because everybody has a valuable time this evening. First of all, the project worked out. I appreciated the staff. Sean's so cooperative in the past 2 years. And as you know, the project was approved several years ago, and it cannot be extension. We saw fire reapply. This time, we went through all detailed design. First of all, architectural, it's a Spanish style. It was reviewed by town consultant, and it was deemed appropriate architectural blend into the hillside. in terms of the bulkiness, in terms of the material use, is a Spanish look. That's number one for architecture. Second one, the few issues. One is the area occupied for this property house is limited area. It's on the top of the peak area, 6,000 square feet. Plus, there is a 20 feet setback from side. So the actually area can be put a house is around 3,000 square feet. And that's why we have a little bit area built outside the LRDA area, about 30%, 32%. So majority is still within the allowable area. So that's one thing we ask for, approval. And the other thing is this, the driveway up higher than 15%. It was blasted by fire department, the Santa Clara Fire Department. Our civil engineer can address to that. And which is built not only meet the fire department requirement, which is about a little over 19%, and also the architecturally designed on the face of the driveway, it's really stone look and the plan into the forest style. And another thing, because of this, the hillside here, we got to do multi-layer for the basement, cellar, sub-cellar, and so actually the house for the area accountable is around 2,800 square feet. It's very compatible within the neighborhood, zone HR-1. And so the dirt, back to the dirt quantity, we have to exceed in the cut because the nature of the property, the slope. So probably I leave the civil engineer to address that if you have a concern about this question. And other than that, the tree cut, that in the Shanghai, just to respond to that, 57 tree removed. If a further question, I can refer to my landscaping architect, Todd, to answer that. So tonight, I'm standing here on behalf of the owner, which is Sam Pan. Hopefully, everybody on the same page here give a thumb up to approve the project. Thank you very much. I was thinking maybe my civil engineer should stand here, use the rest of the time to answer a question which you might concern. Okay, thank you.
Are there questions for the speaker?
Yes, go ahead.
Commissioner, but
You want Hanson. Commissioner Hanson had her hand up.
Commissioner Hanson.
I just had one question
Sure.
before we hear the any comments from the public. But I'm looking at Exhibit 8, which is the consulting architecture report. And,
right.
and while you're correct, and I agree that he did complement the overall design, if you look at page 4, it says, however, the scale and design of the house is quite similar to the photo shown on page 37 of the Hillside Development Standards and Guidelines. As a don't do this example, see the photo below. And then he goes on and talks about other parts of the Hillside Design Guidelines that we should be looking at as a commission. And while it's not other than the LRDA in terms of size, it isn't in violation of FAR, for example. But FAR isn't really relevant because the property is very large and there's only a very small usable portion of the land that you can build on. So my question for you is, you didn't comment on this particular comment from the consulting architect as to how this design doesn't look like a don't do this example from our Hillside Design Guidelines, because that is something that we have to consider in our decision.
This comment came out almost a year ago, and it was kind of on the positive side for my design there. And of course, Sean was kind of concurred that one. After this kind of a comment come out, we still working on the architecture in terms of the look of the house from a certain angle, which is looking like a 2-story or 3-story. And Sean pointed out, looks like a 3-story. So really refine the design to meet the, perception. Looks like a 2-story on the hillside. And counting from, the driveway up there. So as far as other issue that what he mentioned that it's okay, but do not copy the other design? Is what you're talking about? Please repeat that one for me.
I think what he's saying in his report is that the building scale and mass
Yeah.
is quite large
Yes,
from
yes.
his perspective. And he was comparing it to our hillside design guidelines. If you haven't read them, have pictures of do this and don't do that. And he's saying with respect to the building mass and scale that this design that you have appears to be in the don't do this category. And so I'm wondering if you've thought about maybe a smaller scale and mass than what you have on the proposal.
Actually, to be honest with you, this site is so difficult to design a house, particularly it's only a longitudinal style. So when you look at the building from front, looks at bulk very large compared with a small house on the ground level. This one, only thing can allow the architect to design a nice, decent house is go longitudinal way to design. If you look at the sideway of the house, it's very narrow. So his comment, I look at it, but I didn't really spend the time to look into reduce the house because our house, by comparison with the neighborhood, only 2,800 square feet. I'm talking about the FAR area, not the below the grade. And that's why I look at it again, and as I repeat it again, after that, we'll work out the certain details of the house, like create a outdoor balcony to reduce the house size. So create a multi-level because on the hillside. So let me repeat again, the house it cannot go transverse the area to design a house. Otherwise, because of the limit of this area, so we go horizontal way. So look up here is a little bigger. And but because we use a different in and out design, if you can see his comment, and create a different details of that. Some roof is flat roof, sometimes roof is a steel pitched roof. So the whole mixture of the scale design, I think I think it's appropriate to blend into it, this hillside. I didn't think about the other way to design it. Because first of all, several years ago, the original approved design by the commission, if you look at the old set of drawing, it's still developed longitudinal way, and even it's bigger than what we have here. Okay, that's all I can answer if I recall correctly. Okay, go ahead.
That you answered my question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions?
one
Commissioner?
Yeah, for me?
Sir, excuse me.
Sure.
Commissioner Badami.
Thank you for your presentation. You mentioned that you've got 2 stories from the east and south elevations, but I think you failed to mention the west elevation, which you've got 3 levels of the residence that's visible from the west. And we prohibit 3-story elevations.
True.
It just adds to the mass and bulk.
Now, Sean pointed out during design course, and we work out, by definition, that's a 2-story element. It's not a 3. Appear like a 3, but actually it's a 2-story element. If you're looking from the driveway approaching the garage on the lower level, and the second floor on the top, but everything behind is far away from the second floor. So it kind of like misleading you, look like a 3-story, actually it's 2-story. But the picture shown on the drawing, which is the east elevation, let me look at that thing. Let me lead you through that one.
Well, I will take this up with staff later, because when I
Okay.
look at the definition of a story, it says...
Oh, yeah, right.
If I could finish, sir. It says at the finished floor level directly above a basement or cellar is more than 6 feet above grade, such basement or cellar or garage or whatever we want to call it shall be considered a story. But I'll talk with staff on that later.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Other
you.
questions for the speaker? Seeing none, thank you very much.
All right, thank
I'm
you.
going to call upon the public, following which you'll have 5 minutes to speak further. We have Mr. Ralph Haupt.
familiar.
Yeah, I go by
Okay,
Ken.
I need to make a disclosure here.
Yeah,
Mr. Halp, you and other speakers from the public will have 3 minutes.
Sure.
When the yellow light comes on, it means you have 30 seconds left. Please state your name and address for the record.
yeah, a formal name is Ralph Halp. I go by Ken. We're on Vista Del Mar, which is, I thank you very much for giving us a look. But my backyard will look right up at that, their west-facing garage part right there that goes this way, which is now trees. So I may only make this comment, I just let them go as deep as they can in that dirt so that I don't see the, as much of that side house. They used to have a nice view on the online where I could look.
Your comments need to be made to the commission, sir. Thank you.
So if they could, I'd like to see the view from they used to have on one of the earlier plan views, it kind of showed what you would see from houses like mine. So any way to have that, because I look up and all I see is the trees now, so I have walked up to their property. I apologize if I should, but to look, and I think the trees are coming down, so I'll be able to see that entire end of the house. But it's difficult for me to see right now because I can't see the story poles because they're behind the trees. But with the trees down, I don't know if there's a way to kind of show us what it looks like after the trees are gone. I don't know if there's a view that we could see. So that's what I would ask, is just if I could see a view when those trees disappear. That's my request.
Thank you. Questions for the speaker? Commissioner Badami.
So I just want to clarify, your concern is the west side of his home, as it would look down on your home, and the west side is the one that we see the 3 levels of residence.
It is. I want to balance that. I'm glad it's the garage. It doesn't look like, at least from the plans, that's a livable place down there. So it's just more of, I can't tell what I'm going to see right now. So it's unknown to me. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? Thank you very much. Anna Jean Anderson.
Hi, good evening. Anna Jean Anderson from Uplift Family Services. You've noted on your page 7 of 11 of the prospectus here that it's Ming Kwong Children's Center. We changed our name about 3 years ago. So it's Uplift Family Services. And the address that you have listed is the 17511 Phillips Avenue address. The correct address is 499 Loma Alta. We are on the south side of this property, and this is the first time. If I hadn't have gone, I'm the Director of Facilities and Real Estate for Uplift Family Services. If I hadn't have gone back to our back side of the property, I wouldn't have seen the story poles, and I wouldn't have seen that this hearing was going on today. So here's our concern. There was another building that was going to be built on this property, I want to say, I don't know, maybe 6 years ago. I think the property sold, and now there's a new applicant building a house. So we're on the south side. So it looks like that. I'm not sure. I tried to look at the drawing, but I think that might be the front door. Is your front door on the south side? No, I'm not supposed to address, but that's my question. Is where the front door is. What happens is, because it's so high of where they can build, they look down directly onto the property. We have 20 kids on the property. They're there 24/7. They're there for mental health issues. So their privacy is completely impacted by this. The concerns are, their goings and comings throughout the day. Anytime that there's kids acting out. We have a swimming pool on the property. So our concern is a privacy concern. that these kids are provided.
Thank you. I have a question.
Yes.
Do you have a solution in mind?
So, I'm with the other gentleman. Let them go as deep as they want, so that it's not as high. We need some type of, I don't know. Let them build. I know there's a variance asked for in some of those retaining walls going up the driveway. I think the driveway is right about where the turn is, where the deemed navigational waterways are. So I'm a little concerned about where that water's going to go when it starts coming down the hill from Phillips and above. It trickles right down through all that property down there, and crosses underneath the road into a big drain pipe. So I think that's right where his driveway's going. There's just lots of questions that I would need to find out more about before I can even come up with a solution for you.
Thank you. Other questions for the speaker? Commissioner Birch.
Were you on board as the real estate director during the previous application?
Yes.
Did you also come and speak to
Yes.
express those same concerns?
Yes.
Thank you.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
I have to ask the staff a question first to see if I have a question. You sent out notices to people within 500 feet, and when I was out at the property today, it looks like, what's the present name? I couldn't hear you.
It's Uplift Family Services.
Uplift Family?
Yes.
It looked like Uplift Family's fence, for example, was clearly within 500 feet.
Yes.
So just one second. Did you send them a notice?
We did. 499 Loma Alta is on the list of notices sent out.
Okay, so you didn't see that notice?
I did not. It did not get to me.
Okay, well, I mean, their obligation is to send the notice.
Understood.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure, I just wanted to find out. Thank you.
Commissioner Badami.
When you spoke out on behalf of the prior project, that was in 2011, were you in favor, in support of that project?
No. But the solution that they came up with, they redesigned the house to have it was a completely different type of design, but they had a big overextending patio, if you would, deck, and they moved it to the other side of the house. And they were going to plant several trees against my fence area to try and mitigate some of that privacy.
Thank you.
Other questions for the speaker? Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
On a personal note, do you have a card or a flyer or something?
You know,
because for 100 years it's been Ming Kwang to me. I didn't know
I
you
know.
changed your name.
Yeah, we've gone through a couple of changes,
Do you
but
have
I will get you one.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.
I'm going to ask Mr. Mullen to take a handheld mic, and I'm going to ask the cameraman to focus the camera on the back row. I have Mr. Alan Rudolph, who wishes to address.
Yeah, thank you. My name's Alan Rudolph. I live at 258 Jared Lane, which is the property immediately to the north of the applicants. I live with my wife, and we've been there for many, many years, including the time when the Milligans to our north built their house. And so there's a great deal of traffic that came up and down, and occasionally people parked on the roadway of Jared Lane. That created hazardous situations. One time, my wife was driving down the hill. There was a truck parked on the pavement right at the lower turn, and another truck came around backwards very quickly. She was coming down. The truck didn't stop. It kept going up. She had to come to an emergency stop, put the car into reverse. She has to stick shift, try to go uphill on this very steep grade, almost being knocked off into the gully next to it. And if that had happened, she probably would have flipped. And who knows exactly what would have taken place then. Another time, I was starting to drive down the hill from my residence, and there was a pickup truck parked in a little pull-out area, and the man who owned it was getting out, and so I said, hey, you gotta move, this is dangerous. And he said, certainly I will. But then he went off and he started talking to somebody else. I started to proceed at about 2 miles an hour, and it's lucky I wasn't going 5, because right away his son jumped out of the car right in front of me, and I almost hit him. Now, if I'd been going 5 miles an hour, which is, not very fast, I almost certainly would have hit him, grave injury, maybe killing him. So what I'm suggesting is that no cars be allowed to park on Jared Avenue, and that be a condition for the application. It would make everything a lot safer. On top of that, as you well know, Santa Rosa had a huge problem with fires, and there's going to be 3 families served by this one Jared Road. There has to be absolute ingress and egress in case of an emergency. Otherwise, it's going to be a disaster trying to get people out and emergency vehicles in. That's pretty much what I wanted to say. I also wanted to mention, though, that the applicants, I've met him. He's been very friendly, very receptive to discussion. And so, I'm looking forward to having him as a neighbor sometime. But I'm very concerned about the safety issue and would love to see a prohibition of parking on Jared Lane. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rudolph. Questions for the speaker? Commissioner Janov.
Just a clarification, are you speaking parking during construction or parking after construction?
Well, I think it'd be a really good idea to have it permanent, because with the new neighbors to the north, we've been able to work things out pretty well to get up and down. The problem is that every now and then there's a big delivery truck or something. One time one got stuck in the middle of the road, tore up the side of the hill. Before I had my stroke, I was down there for a couple of days. I was shoveling dirt to get it off the pavement. So things like that happen. And so it'd just be great if we could be sure that there are no cars on Jared Lane, the pavement at all.
Thank you.
Sorry, Commissioner O'Donnell.
Again, this would be a question to staff first. I assume this is not a road that is maintained by the town?
I believe it's private, but I believe Mr. Bagley from Parks and Public Works is behind us as well.
Kevin Bagley, Engineering Division. I believe that Jared, up until the property in question, is public. However, where it makes the bend and goes uphill, I believe that is private. So there's an existing condition already within list of conditions for any parking on the public right-of-way would have to be approved by the town engineer. And obviously any public I'm sorry, I didn't catch his name, Mr. Rudolph's property would not be allowed since it would be private property.
I did not go to the end of that road, thank goodness. But it's been my experience that many of these smaller roads are not dedicated, have not been accepted by the town for obvious reasons. But is there any prohibition against your posting on those roads? For example, no parking?
We can very easily prohibit parking during construction. However, if you're asking for permanent no parking, it would be a question for our traffic engineer who is not here tonight. Obviously, that's something that we can propose to him.
Thank you.
Other questions for Mr. Rudolph? Thank you, Mr. Rudolph. Todd Kalbfeld? He's with the applicant. Steve Yang, Rudolph. I have no other speaker cards. Did I miss anyone? Well, I need to have your cards. Kelsey. Ms. Mary Martin?
Yes, my name's Mary Martin. I live at
You're famous.
254 Vista Del Monte. And along with this gentleman, I'm probably the only one that will get the full view of the house. So I'm very concerned about the scale, the number of trees that are being cut down. And also, did I understand that it's 30% outside the hillside designation?
LRDA.
Okay. So the scale of it is really what I'm concerned about. It sounds pretty massive. And as he said, we can't see the story poles. That's it.
Thank you. Questions for the applicant? Commissioner Birch.
Just to make sure I have myself situated correctly, you will be looking at the west side. similar to the
Exactly.
previous
Almost
speaker.
directly, excuse me, across the street from it.
And from what you've been able to tell then, the current view is blocked by a number of large trees. Those
Exactly.
will be gone.
I have seen no story poles, so
Thank you for the clarification.
I would hope that they would keep as many trees as possible to shield us from the view. Any other questions?
Thank you very much. I have a card for Mr. Michael McDonough. Thank you, sir. State your name and address for the record.
Yeah. Hello, my name is Michael McDonough. I am 253 Vista Del Monte. I am the house immediately next to this new proposal. So I'd like to comment to say, first of all, I'm very happy on the applicant. The applicant himself has been very eager to work with us and eager to be a good neighbor, and that was well received by us. But I have some comments on the process itself to share with everyone here. First of all, the signage is, I guess, on a public road, now I know, but I've been receiving quite a bit of questions from the community asking me where the signage is located. So no one's seeing the signs. They're coming to me and I'm pointing to them, and that's how we're doing it. I can't tell you what happens if I'm not there. Second of all, as the direct neighbor, I did not get a card. And that's quite disappointing. 253 Vista, and that was a shame.
Pardon me, sir, what is your address?
253 Vista Del Monte.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And several of my neighbors, 4 of them, which are directly around the property, are all away this week. I'm celebrating the holiday with their family, so they could not be here to comment. And I don't feel it's appropriate to represent them. But most of them are in favor. They enjoy the applicant, but they do have some concerns on the west side, so to say. I'm very new to California. I'm here less than a year and a half. I'm happy to be a Californian. I come from New Jersey and used to this type of process here. And I'd like to comment that when there is exceptions at a certain percentage, story poles are required. For example, if this was New Jersey, we would find out that the story poles required on the slope of the driveway in order to give more insight to help the public understand that. The other things on the tree removal, I'm sure they'll do the right thing, but as I moved in there and I see there's a lot of existing tags from previous applicants, and it's hard to differentiate between what is today and what was yesterday, but they did a great job in the documentation in the town, but if you get to site, it's a little confusing. And I'll say one last thing is that during the big rains of last year, there was serious flooding coming down through the streams that were pointed out by our neighbors here. It did get into my yard, and I'm sure they'll do a great job taking care of it, but it was a considerable amount of flooding, much more than I'm used to in New Jersey. Thank you so much. Any questions?
Are there questions for Mr. McDonough? Commissioner Birch.
Thank you very much for your detailed review. You said the applicant has reached out to you and you've talked. Have you talked about mitigation for the water runoff? Do you have an understanding?
I haven't. You know, and he's very open, and I'm also maybe naive in a sense that I feel that he's doing the right thing, and I am also doing some construction in my house, and I've noticed just how diligent the town of Los Gatos is, and I really didn't get into that details because I felt that many people with much more expertise and insight will be addressing that. Thank you.
Other questions for the speaker? Commissioner O'Donnell.
Just again, the speaker has said he did not receive notice, and I noticed staff checked the list, and I'm just curious, was the notice sent?
His address was on the list. We believe the notice was sent. Sorry you didn't get it.
The applicant has, as I said, been very, very informative, and I do know where the sign is, so I knew about tonight, and I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. Where in New Jersey?
I was in Randolph, right outside of Morristown, but the weather's much greater here, so I'm happy to be here. No snow.
You know 280 goes down to Perth Amboy.
I do indeed.
I built it. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I'll now call the applicant to come back for 5 minutes of rebuttal.
Good evening, Commissioner. My name is Ninley. I'm the project civil engineer for the site. I want to address some of the concern that was brought up by the public. In terms of the location, the garage is in the cut sections of the hillside. It's approximately 17 feet lower from the existing ground. If you look at the garage from the west side, it's going to be very difficult to see it, especially if you're on the lower elevations. Because of the sections required, the tier retaining wall, and those retaining wall, one is probably around 4 and the other one's 7 feet high. So when you look up at it, you most likely will not be able to see the garage. In terms of the drainage concern, I've designed the site so that there's 3 retention ponds in the bottom, which can accommodate a 10-year flood based on the town requirement. I've also designed a swale along the south property frontage, so any water that's coming down will be captured by that swale and redirected into the retention ponds. And if the retention pond is saturated, then it's going to flow into the stream and carrying all the water from the slope, carrying all the water from the developed area into the stream, not allowing to cross Jared Lane. One of the other concern is the parking issue during constructions. We're going to put a requirement that the contractor is going to post a sign along there that doesn't allow construction parking on the site during the constructions. We'll make that requirement, apply the requirement, the construction operation plan for the project. In terms of the trees removal on the west side, the project proposed some removal of the trees on the west side, but there's quite a few trees left near the property board on the left side also, if you take a look at the tree removal plans. I think that's all I have for tonight.
Thank you, sir. I'll need a speaker card when we're done chatting with you. And are there questions for the speaker? Commissioner Birch.
Actually, Commissioner Hanson had her hand up before me, so I've spoken a lot, so I'll let her go first.
Thank you. Commissioner Hanson.
I just wanted to make sure I understood what you said. So the concern that I heard is everyone in the west side of the property was concerned about not being able to know what it was going to be like after all was said and done. So if I heard you correctly, they aren't going to see the garage, and would that mean any portion of the house because of the retaining walls and because some of the trees were there? Help
well,
me.
There are trees.
What will the people on the west side see when this is all done and the trees are removed?
Well, most likely they're going to see the trees because the trees along the west property line still remain there. You got to have a really tall trees along the west property line that still remain there. There's still plenty of trees left along the west side of the property.
Okay, maybe we're looking at the wrong plans. We're looking at quite a few of the trees on the west side of the house, but you're saying right on the property line there's additional trees that aren't going to be removed. Is that correct? Correct. Okay.
I think I'm going to need another speaker card.
You have my speaker card. I'm Todd Kelpfeld.
I do.
So I'm the landscape architect on staff. The trees that are going to be removed are only to accommodate for the building of the residence and the driveway. And I'm very well aware of this property. Prior to getting on this project, I did a landscape plan on one of the properties, I don't know the address, right next to it. And when I drew that, I never even knew there was a property here. It's very well wooded. I don't believe that they will even see the home. And I've walked this property over and over and over. It's very well laid out. I went back to the property and laid out all the additional trees that were required for this application. There's 122? Many trees that we tagged on this trees. I went up there with the arborist. I think this is a very nice project, and I don't really think they're going to see the residents at all. I didn't even know that there was somebody on the other side of Jared Lane as I worked here.
Okay, so I totally understand that. I wondered, The problem with this particular application is normally when we put story poles up, that you don't have this issue with this many trees being removed, and so then it's possible for the residents to see what the impact is going to be. And so right now it's just you're saying yes, there won't be an issue, but how do they know there won't be an issue is kind of my concerns. I don't know if there's a way you can do some kind of rendering that would show the trees removed and prove to them that that's what they're going to see before and after. I don't know if that's a possibility, but I wanted to ask about that.
Well, if you look at the sheet C4, which is the Jet Lane Centerline Street Plan and Profile, you can see all the trees that's to remain along the west side of the property.
Okay, so if the residents had access to that, and that's, but I mean, and I guess the elevations are in there too, but so you're saying because of that, they shouldn't be able to see anything?
And if you look on the L drawings, there's actually a section right there that shows the home, and the proposed residence will be screened from the existing trees.
Okay, let's Commissioner Byrd ask some questions.
Well, it actually follows up on that. So did you create drawing L4? So that's the west elevation. And if I was one of the neighbors and was using the drawing that you provided, even understanding the slope and that I would be being down, you can see the whole house. You don't depict that there's a canopy shielding this house. If anything, this actually looks larger from the west elevation than the architectural drawings look.
Yes, that elevation was drawn to show how some of the trees that are closer, and also shows how the plantings that will be planted will help mitigate the height of the retaining wall. If you go look at the next drawing, you'll see the sections go all the way to the property line and all the way to the adjacent properties. And you can see where the section, all the trees will screen all the way up to the second floor. It's a really nicely wooded site.
Okay. Can I ask one additional question then?
Yes, Commissioner.
Okay, so then this kind of talks about the tree removal and the water runoff. If I take a look at drawing, I think it's C4, it appears that the 3 ponds you created, 2 are flanking the entry and 1 is a little bit, if I'm staring at the drawing, to the left of that. But they're somewhat clustered around the entry to the property. Am I seeing that correctly?
That's correct.
So if I was lot 26, 27, 28 on that side, and there is some tree removal, you don't feel that there's going to be additional erosion and the runoff running directly into those properties? I'm not sure I understand how they're going to be accounted for in 3 ponds that are actually located on the south side.
Well, if you look at the contour, it's the surface drainage is from north to south. And all the water from the impervious area are collected in a drainage system and released into those ponds. Let me see. Let's take a look at sheet C2.1. If you look at C2.1, all the downspout are collected into a pipe and ultimately released into the retention pond at the bottom.
I see that and I understand that, but it appears to be addressing the higher elevation along the house and the driveway. My question was, knowing that there is some tree removal and some of them are quite large, we're then removing those roots. And if I was looking to, basically, let's look at where the driveway bends and then west, I don't see anything that's diverting water from that downflow.
There's a ditch right along the driveway that's collecting all the water.
Are you removing any
The
trees
ditch
between
on
that
the-
line and the property
I'm
below
sorry?
it? Are there any trees being removed from the driveway line and the west side properties then?
From the driveway line, there's no tree being removed from the retaining wall to the west property line.
Okay, that better answers my question then.
And
Thank
there's
you.
an additional planting.
I saw that. I just wanted, thank you.
Other questions? Commissioner Badami?
Just to follow up on that, are you assuring us that none of the existing trees would be impacted by construction?
We're going to assure that all of these existing trees are going to be properly fenced off with required construction fencing. It'll be chain link fencing, then the poles will be stuck in the ground, and all of these existing trees will be shielded off, and also all of the necessary equipment will stay away from the root systems.
Thank you.
Commissioner Hanson?
I forgot to ask earlier about the Family Services Center to the, I think she said to the south of the property. She had some pretty serious concerns about the privacy of the children that are there. And could you maybe comment on what will they be seeing from where they sit looking up to your property?
I'm sorry, I had to be back for this particular issue here. If you look at AS6, architecture section profile, longitudinal profile from the top all the way to this property, that distance from there, see on the top is the project. Then we have a woodland in front. Then you have a retaining wall for the driveway. And the sloping down to Jared Land. And across that is a fenced property. That's where this privacy issue occurs. The distance between two properties is far. Also, we have a woodland in front of the building, which is shielded of all, line of sight. However, privacy for this two property, I don't think it's a really issue. Of course, that's what I can see. If you look at this section, you can get a feeling. Just a second. Yeah, 158. Okay, between the two property measurements around more than 200 or 250 linear feet are using the scale measurement on the top. The top section showing 158. Because I don't have a proper dimension between two properties. So you can see that I would say it's more than 200 feet away from there, which is downhill side. That's what I wanted to tell you. This is the relationship between two properties. And of course, if there is impact on the private issue for the kids, that, I leave it to the commission to decide how to mitigate that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Birch?
Just one. The architect. I just want to know, did you at any time go speak with the property across the street and have a discussion about the privacy issue?
Several times I was trying to get in. It's very difficult. It's fenced off, number one. There's a gate. I don't want an intruder to go there, so I never got a chance to talk to the property owner.
Okay.
And to me, it's like a commercial building, maybe less concern of there's a single family built on the side, plus the woods in the front, and I didn't have a chance, sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? I have a question. I have a number of concerns with the project, the LDRA, which is brought up before. The slope itself, it seems over 30%. Someone said we were 30% outside the LDRA. I think we're 38.
I believe the staff report is 36.2 or 37.
That's the combination of the two considerations.
37.2.
It's a very challenging location. I walked it and tried not to die while I was walking it. But when you get down to the bottom of the property as we approach Jared, or let's say I'm driving up Jared and I'm about to turn left into the property, into the driveway. How do you handle the swale? How do you handle the creek? Are you going to build a bridge, put in a pipe?
We're not impacting the existing roadway at that sections.
I thought I'm heading up Jared, and I make a left-hand turn into the property.
No, that's not the entry. No, the entry doesn't go all the way up and where it goes into the gully.
If you guys can come up to the mic, that'd be helpful.
All right, maybe I've got it mistaken. I thought where we crossed is where the driveway was.
You're probably referring just to a dirt trail to gain access to the property.
Okay. Thank you very much. Other questions for the applicant? If not, I'm going to close the public portion of the public hearing, and we are going to take a 7-minute break. They make fun of me when I say 5-10-minute break and we come back to the, but it's not me. I watched the hearings today with what's his name, Zuckerberg, and they said, we're going to take a 5-minute break. He said it at 1:19, they came back at 1:33, so it's not just me. We're taking a break. Having closed the public portion of the public hearing, commissioners? I look to my commissioners for question, comment, or for someone to make a motion. Commissioner Badami.
I have two questions for staff. Is it possible to fit a smaller house within the LRDA?
I would assume so, yes.
All right. And my second question is there such a definition of what constitutes a reasonable-sized hillside residence?
I don't think.
The reason I ask is because the applicant has provided a justification letter in Exhibit 7 and states the size of the house is needed because it needs to be a reasonable-sized hillside residence.
Sure, and I think the answer to the question is no, there's no definition of reasonable size. I would say that that's probably in the eye of the beholder.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Commissioner O'Donnell.
Are we in a position where we can have some discussion too, or is it just questions?
Comments, discussion,
Okay.
yes.
Because I don't have a problem with the size of the house. We've seen a lot of hillside houses that are considerably larger on the ground level. What I thought, it's very, very difficult, as you all know, to try to walk up that hill. Yep. It's a very, very difficult lot. I guess I have more of a problem with what it will look like. It isn't what the square footage is, it's how is that square footage arranged. For example, on one of the drawings where they were saying you weren't following the guidelines, where it steps down the hill. I don't know if you could step down this hill, but obviously it doesn't step down the hill. So I guess what I want to be careful of is I personally wouldn't necessarily start with the house is too big. I might, on the other hand, say the house maybe has some questions on how it's designed and how it makes use of the size. Only if there's nothing you could do you have to ask yourself the question, because it goes outside of the LRDA, and I can see why it goes outside of the LRDA. That is one of the most difficult lots I have had the pleasure of walking up to. So the reason I'm just mentioning this, I mentioned to the chair, is I would hope that we get a chance to talk a little bit too about, is it simply that the size of the house is our problem, or is it the location, the design, the placement? Because if you're going to spend all the money they're going to spend to make this thing work, how small can you make the house as a roof? But that's another question you have to ask yourself. We don't have to say that's our problem. It's not our problem. But just from a reasonableness standpoint, which is an undefined term, I'm just inviting some conversation because I was troubled when I looked at it. On the other hand, I'm very sympathetic to the applicant's difficulties. It's a very difficult lot. And I was not taken aback by the size of the house. But there are a lot of questions about the west side view. We've gotten some real discussions on it. So the only reason I'm going on, I'm going to stop right now, is I'm just trying to invite some conversation on that. So I will personally at least feel better about whatever it is we're going to do.
Well, Commissioner O'Donnell, I share your concerns. I don't exactly know what to do. This is a quasi-judicial process. It's not a legislative process. We can't make up the law. We simply apply the rules and regulations that have been given to us. And I feel, not intentionally, but I feel there's a disregard for the slope constraints, for the LRDA, for the massive amount of retaining walls, far in excess of our standards. The height of the walls, the length of the walls, our standard is 5 feet. I think one of them is at 14 feet. We have walls can only be so long, and yet one of them is just huge. It runs the length of the driveway, I think. When we get down to dirt, as Commissioner Michael Burke used to talk, we have cuts on this project where the limit on a house footprint is 8 feet cut, the applicant is requesting 24. That's where I feel there's a disregard. Where we have maximum fill to come back in on driveways, 3 feet, the applicant is requesting 16. So this is just way outside anything I've experienced before. The site constraints are severe, but again, we look to Mr. Cannon, who doesn't, when he's not as graphic as this, he's picked out the design of the building and he said it's a don't do this from page 37, as Commissioner Hanson pointed out. So Tom, Commissioner O'Donnell, I'm just hitchhiking on your remarks about, I have concerns, I don't know what to do. I don't think it's necessarily too big. I just think it's way outside the LRDA. And I think they're digging holes way outside what we don't want cut in the hillside. I mean, I wrote myself a note when I was going through the 4 exceptions. And I was saying, back in 2004, when this was approved, and the only one there at the time was Mr. Paulson, I think. None of us were. But when they approved it, why? Why did they have these constraints? And the answer is in the front of the document from 2004. It's to preserve the hillsides. You don't cut, you don't do this, you don't do that, because we cherish our hillsides. And it's like in the preamble, in the forward, things to consider, raison d'etre for why they were even bothering to do this back in 2004, because people were building huge things up there, and we decided to preserve our hills and preserve our towns. So that's it from me. It's a lot of concerns. I don't pretend to have a solution. Commissioner Hanson.
I was just going to say I agree with pretty much everything that's been said. I wanted to say some things I agree with. I do think that the general idea of where the LRDA is definitely correct, and from several perspectives, the size above ground isn't in violation of any issues. As I said earlier, the FAR is not a relevant calculation here because most of the land isn't usable, so I wouldn't even consider FAR as a measure of this. But I go back to the consulting architect's comments about the mass and scale and what we said earlier about the don't do this. The other thing is that about the driveway. I read all the reports about the proposals and the discussions with the fire department, and I understand all that, but I have to wonder if there isn't some other design that wouldn't have to cut into the hill so much to do that driveway. Is there another way to do, access or egress into the project? Because that alone, cutting up the hillsides like that is just such a big violation over and above, what is allowed in our standards. I just have to wonder if there isn't another way. And I do think that the house overall, I mean, we have a seller policy for a reason, and it is to put square footage in lieu of above ground square footage is really the intent of the policy. In this particular case, we're looking at having a below grade square footage that is well in excess of the above ground square footage, and I have to wonder if that is really necessary to have that much mass and scale. Maybe a 2-level thing might be more appropriate and fit better into the hillside and maybe fit a little bit better in the LRDA. So those were my comments. I just feel like maybe there's some things that can be tweaked about this thing to make it more in line with our hillside guidelines.
I would ask the commissioners if we have an idea at this point. I'm not hearing 6 green lights. I'm wondering if we should discuss a reason to continue it. Commissioner O'Donnell?
Let me say this, because I may be coming at this differently than anybody else. And it also may be a matter that will be appealed. And so I want to have both sides, if there are both sides, just on the record. When I look at this lot, I think it's a very, very, very difficult lot, one of the most difficult I've seen. when I look at the cut and fill, it's fortunate that it isn't on the front side of the hillside. We're trying to protect the hillsides for a couple of reasons, one of which is view. The cut and fill here is not viewed. So I put that. Secondly, the best place to build on this lot, the RDA, is on the top of the hill. Well, you got to get there. And to get there, you need a road. And to get the road there, you need the fire department to get up there. So somebody, whoever builds this, is going to need a road that the fire department blesses. And that's going to mean big cut and fill, big retaining walls. And when we say, well, can't we do it differently? I guess I want to be very careful that we recognize that the cut and fill is all on the back side of the hill, not visible from below. Secondly, if the LRDA is on the top of the hill, that's where we put it. You got to get there or you can't put anything up there. Would it make a significant difference if it stayed within the perimeters of the LRDA? Or is there some room, and we know legally there is, some room to go beyond? Now, maybe 37 is too much, I don't know. But if we just simply say, you could do a better job and send it back to him, please come before us with a better job. I think we are not dealing with the fact that the cut and fill, to me, you could say this lot is unbuildable if you want to buy the lot. We can't say that because we don't want to buy the lot. But I don't know how you get to the top of that hill if you don't do this cut and fill and satisfy the fire department. If that's the case, then the one thing you can talk about clearly is the size of the house. You can say, okay, you got to do that because you got to get to the top of the hill, but the house is too big. So I want everything within the LRDA. Maybe you could do that. There are a number of things you could do, but for the purpose of the record, I want to say I think this, if the lot is usable and if the LRDA means anything, you got to get there. And I don't know any way to get there except with a substantial cut and fill and with retaining walls, all of which are beyond the normal things, but this lot is beyond the normal lots. If there were cut and fill on the front of this property, it wouldn't happen because the visibility would be terrible. So there are things that we could do before we'd approve something. There are conditions we could make. But I think if we really feel that the cut and fill is too much and those kind of things, we probably ought to just turn it down and let the council deal with them. But I don't see how anybody can build on this lot without the cut and fill. If, on the other hand, we feel it's just too big, we could come up with some comments on why it's too big and maybe it should be totally within the LRDA. But what will that mean? As I said, the size of this house compared to most of the houses that get built up there is not that big above the ground. And the below the ground, I don't know why that's a concern.
I don't disagree with you, Commissioner.
But let me just finish by saying I'm finished. So I just want to get that in the record, that's all.
Yeah. I think you hit something I tried to hit earlier, which was, I don't know how I can approve this. It's a judicial process. We're applying what council has given us to protect the hills. I don't know that we can approve this. I don't want to kick it upstairs. I'm not passing the buck. I'm saying my job of applying this language in a quasi-judicial fashion makes it very difficult for me to approve this. Commissioner Janoff, you had your hand up.
Thank you. I agree with Commissioner O'Donnell's comments. It is a very challenging lot. I think one of the benefits to the location of the house as proposed, though, is you've got this beautiful oak forest. Now, you're going to lose an awful lot of that when you cut the driveway nearly completely laterally across the property. If I'm just doing a rough count, you're losing 33 trees alone just to do the driveway, 23 for the house, and that's just a rough estimate. Most of the trees that you're losing are on the west side of the property, which is the border that's of concern to the neighbors. My question, I did go up to the top of the hill, and if the neighbor to the north has access, which you do, then this property could also have access at the top of the hill. So my question is, why are we cutting up this swath of earth that goes laterally across the property when you could provide driveway access to the east side of the house if you flip the house? You know, I don't know whether that's possible, but it would have a significantly less impact on the amount of cut and fill that we're doing just for the driveway.
Well, it's a better idea than I had. Commissioner Badami?
I have major,
I can address that question.
Oh,
I'm
let's
sorry.
wait for
I'm
staff.
sorry to interrupt. The short answer is they don't have easement from that side of the property, from where the corner, where Jared bends and goes up the hill. Their ingress egress easement ends. The original 2011 project, before it was approved, had entrance from that side. And through a lot of discussion that I won't bore you with, it was determined that there is no easement there. So the applicant for that project came back, explored, I believe, 6 different driveway routes, taking access from about where this current proposal has it. And the least impactful, deemed least impactful back then, was very similar to this design. And when this applicant took over this application, they reviewed those plans and started in that footprint.
Is it possible to get that easement? What would it take to get that easement?
It would take the owner of that land to grant easement to this property owner.
Could I have their phone number? Other comments? Commissioner Badami?
so back to that easement, is that the reason for the major differences between the 2011 original project and the 2018 proposed project with the grading measurements? Because you've got 933 cubic yards of cut in 2011. This project, you've got 3,406 cubic yards of cut. Is this all due to the driveway? You have 774 cubic yards of fill in 2011. 2018, you've got 1,450 cubic yards of fill. Most significant, you've got in 2011, 159 cubic yards of export. 2018, you've got 1,956 cubic yards of export. That's a lot of dirt being hauled off that hill and on roads. And that also, we've got to realize, that creates increased loads on our under-improved hillside streets during construction. So there's more to it than meets the eye with some of the ramifications of cutting so deeply into these hillsides. And my concern too is this, I'm having trouble seeing that this actually meets the goals and intent and vision of our hillside design standards and guidelines.
Feels like we're trying to compassionately put a round peg in a circle, squared.
Find out from the chair. I think a question essentially was asked of Mr. Mullen, if I understand. You did ask a question. Could we ask Mr. Mullen if he can answer the question?
Sorry.
Regarding the grading numbers, I can defer to the project engineer, Kevin Bagley, and the differences between the two projects.
Sure.
Thank you.
So looking at the staff report for the April 27th, 2011 Planning Commission, just a little bit of history if you're not aware. So the first time they met at Planning Commission, I believe, was March 9th of 2011, and then they got continued to April 2011, and that was mainly due to the easement issue and the repositioning of the driveway. So during that, the staff report for April 2011, they make clear the differences between the initial report and then the secondary report, and then I will go into the differences between the secondary report and the one we're looking at tonight, if that's clear. So according to the report, there was a 22% decrease in cut from the original to the secondary. That went from 1,202 to 933 cubic yards. And then we're looking at tonight 1,450 cubic yards. So the driveway alone would not account for that difference. And then, sorry, 1 second. Fill increased from 386 yards to 774 yards between those two applications. And then tonight we are looking at 1,450. I'm sorry if I said, I think 3,406 cubic yards of cut for tonight's application and 1,450 cubic yards of fill for tonight's application. Did that answer your question?
Not really. Those are the numbers I read to you, and I got these off one of the exhibits, and it was It was from EMC Planning Group. It was one of the mitigated initial study documents. So the numbers you just read off to me were the numbers that I just read off, and you're saying yes or no that had to do with the driveway easement that was going to be in effect back then, or not in effect, that would have made it less?
So there was changes due to the driveway easement. There are additional changes between the April 27th application and tonight's application, showing predominantly the same alignment for the driveway. So there are additional increases or changes in the grading that are not associated with the driveway.
And I would just jump in, and I don't want to presuppose an action, but a lot of the conversation has been around continuance. We can get some additional information from the applicant and staff as it relates to some of these discrepancies between the previous and the current proposals. And that also would allow the opportunity for the applicant to provide some additional information as to why they may or may not believe that the numbers that were contained in the documents for the 2011 report were accurate.
Okay, thank you. My question was answered, so thank you very much.
Other questions or comments? Commissioner O'Donnell.
With the comment we just got, which was a good comment, it seems to encourage us, and to the applicant's benefit too, to delve into this a little more, because you had two applications, is what you're telling us, in 2011, one in March and one in April. One in March was dealing with the easement issue. The one in April had given up on the easement, I take it. You should have had two sets of numbers for the cubic feet taken out and put in too. So when we look at 2011, we really ought to have two sets of numbers, because the set, pardon me, Commissioner Badami is showing only has one, as I recall. So we had to clarify that. And then, to the extent we do clarify that, it would be nice to know how much of the total is actually because of the roadway, and if it's not significantly, or let's say predominantly because of the roadway, then we should find out where else it's coming from. And I don't want to compare 2011 incorrectly, and from what we have now, we would be comparing it incorrectly. It may not get better, but it should get more accurate. So the chair had originally suggested the possibility of a continuance. I'm hearing things now that should be very helpful. The other thing I would say is the chair talks about it is a quasi-judicial thing. That doesn't mean we cannot not adopt the exceptions which are provided in the code, because that's part of the judgmental decision. So there's nothing unusual. Nobody's asking for something that we can't approve. They're asking for something we may not want to approve for good reason, but there's nothing legally which would prevent us from doing it, if we have the facts to do it. So I just don't want to get hung up on this quasi-judicial thing. So, okay, so I would suggest to the chair again that your original suggestion is looking more and more attractive.
Commissioner Hanson.
Having listened to this discussion, I think I would be interested in a continuance, because although this is a new application, there was an application back in 2011 that it was found to be approvable, and it had significantly less cut and fill, and I don't think we understand all the differences between, and maybe, that might help us with understanding why this is the best design, if we could understand why there needs to be this much more movement of soil and stuff like that. So I would be in favor of the continuance to explore some of those issues and be sure that this would be the right design, because it is a challenging property, and making the right decisions, would be the right thing for the hillsides, but we don't have all the facts yet.
Yeah. Before we go to the obvious place, the little I've been able to gather on the 2011 decision, I just want to make it clear, I'm not sure that's a decision I would have supported. The guidelines had been out for 5-6 years. Maybe it hadn't been tested on such a constrained site before. But the 4 years I served with you, Commissioner O'Donnell, we didn't get in anything this complicated. And I think there's some areas of concern in the 2011 decision. So we can go back and learn why the cut is drastically reduced from the immediate proposal, that's not a bad idea. Commissioner Badami?
But I would like to add to that, that prior project only exceeded the area outside of the LRDA by 833 square feet.
Right.
This is 1,232 square feet. So how much is that adding to the extra grading and cut and fill that we're getting concerned about?
So let us see. Commissioner Birch.
Well, before we move into that, I want to add a few more points to maybe give direction or whatever. I'm looking at this as a fully new application. However, the comparative numbers on the cut and fill between the house and the driveway would be very helpful to understand that impact. But taking it beyond that, which I agree is a big issue, when we just look at the overall size, which obviously impacts grading and all the other things we're talking about, typically when we are looking for, or when we have sellers, we are looking for them to displace visible square footage, visible home below ground, so moving typical home functions below ground to minimize the mass. And I'm not sure, in my opinion, I'm seeing that here. I think it's in addition to the mass. And then when you look at that with the LRDA, I'm not sure that we could actually fit it easily in there, but perhaps we would not be exceeding it to the limit that we are now, which would impact all the other numbers. And then to another point that I consider is equally as important, we looked at a home earlier today that went from a 2-story to a 1-story because of the concern of one neighbor, essentially. We have 3 neighbors and one, what I'm going to call a highly sensitive property, because there are children on it all expressing concerns about potential privacy issues. And I feel that they should be heard. If we're going to ask one applicant to address privacy issues, we need all applicants to address privacy issues because it's a big deal, particularly I think when you have 28 children on a property. It's not a commercial property, it's a property full of children. So I feel if we're saying we want them to go back and take a look, I would like to see some continued outreach with the neighbors that have expressed concerns. And there may be more neighbors because it is spring break, and I would like, when this returns, to have feedback from those neighbors. There's a dual responsibility here, to have those neighbors come back and provide for us what they feel, if there is a resolution, what that is, what that compromise is. I would like to see a reduction of the massing because, again, I feel that the seller policy may be being somewhat extended here. And then I would like to see from staff the split numbers between what the cut, fill, excavation numbers are between the house and the driveway.
Do you have your bullets written in front of you? Can you put it into the form of a motion, or did Commissioner Badami write them down?
I wrote them down. I'll give it a try, and if I'm missing something.
Let's see if we have a comment from Commissioner O'Donnell.
I just want to say this. I'm assuming this motion will be to continue the matter. And I'm just, going to make a request of the motion maker. I'm going to miss the next meeting, so I guess I'll get a letter about that, but I'm going to miss the next meeting. But I will be back for the following meeting. So the next meeting is pretty darn short, so I doubt that would be fair to anybody to get an answer that quickly. I would love to, we spent a lot of time on this, and I would like to finish it.
I greatly appreciate that, but a 2-week delay cost to let's see what staff has to say.
Well, a lot of this will depend on what comes out of the motion, but from what I'm hearing, I don't see any way that we're going to be at the next meeting with this item.
All right, let's try the motion. Commissioner Badami.
I move to continue architecture and site application S-17-011 to a date as determined by the Community Development Director, Joel Paul, requesting, you know what, I'm sorry, I'm reading the wrong one.
That'd be Joel Paulson.
Moment.
Joe Paul left the building.
I was ready to do a motion, and I still am. I move to continue to a date certain. Architecture and site application S-16-054, requesting approval for construction of a single-family residence and removal of large protected trees on vacant property zoned HR1. And I would like to continue this item so that we can get more information on cut and fill relating to grading and driveway placement. I'd like to see continued outreach to the neighbors. I'd like for the applicant to consider building within the LRDA or get it closer. I'd like the applicant to consider reducing the massing. And I would hope to get this continued to a date certain with Commissioner O'Donnell's presence.
I'll second the motion. Is there any discussion? Commissioner O'Donnell?
Commissioner Paulson, Mr. Paulson, can give us, I think you can give us a date now. We get that, I've got your date look on his face. We have the date?
Does he have a date or want a date? I don't know. Do you have a date?
I do.
What is it?
I think we'll shoot for May 23rd, which frankly may be ambitious given the requests. But if we're not able to, in conjunction with the applicant, pull all that information together before that meeting, then we'll just continue it to a date certain from there.
Is it possible to reopen the public hearing and find out if that's feasible, or just can I take a nod from the crowd?
We will work with the town attorney's office to make that determination. Typically, when we've closed, it depends on the amount and type of information we receive, but quite often we do reopen those hearings.
All right, thank you. So we have a motion, we have a second. Any discussion? I'll call the question. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Passes unanimously. I want to stick 2 cents in here. Is there any merit to asking the applicant to check into the easement, that it might be obtainable from the neighbor?
You could certainly suggest that, but obviously it's going to need to be amenable to the owner
Totally
of the property.
between them, but it's a way out.
Correct.
All right, thank you. And thank you, Mr. Paul. Mr. Paul. Mr. Paulson, are there appeal rights?
There are no appeal rights because this is a continued item.
Thank you. I'll go to other business. Do we have any commission matters, ladies and gentlemen? Any hot trots? We'll take then a report from the community director.
Just very quickly, last week the council reconsidered Alberta Way and continued it to May 1st. We will be reviewing that again in May. And then they also rescinded the alcohol beverage policy.
Rescinded? As in replaced it with anything, or?
As in is no longer valid and there is no replacement.
Could you clarify that? Does that mean I don't have to order a meal with a drink?
That means a whole lot of things that were in that policy that are no longer rules of the town.
Far out. Oh, well. Anything else, ladies? I don't know. I don't understand.
At the previous meeting, I mentioned council would be considering it last week.
I thought they'd rewrite it, replace it.
No, the recommendation from the policy committee was to rescind it, and the council moved forward with that.
Commissioner Hanson.
I attended the town council policy committee meeting as well as the town council meeting last week, and the issue with the alcohol beverage policy is not that we shouldn't have that. It was that the feeling was that nearly all of the elements of the alcoholic beverage policy are covered in other
ABC
legislation. Yes. So they didn't feel that it was necessary to keep that, and it was redundant, and there might be some conflicting things. That's my summary interpretation. Is that about right?
That makes sense. Thank you very
Mr. Paulson?
much.
Yeah, I think it ended up being, I think the town attorney mentioned one item, and I'm not going to recall either of them. And then the mayor mentioned one other one that would no longer be regulated, but weren't contained in other regulations.
Are there any other items? I want to thank Ms. Lynn Lampros for joining us tonight as acting or co-town council. This meeting's adjourned.